I read Taylor Swift's favourite book, well, one of her favourite books, and this is what I thought of it. Hey, it's Jamie, thanks for stopping by, and today I'm going to be talking about Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, which is one of the books that Taylor Swift highlights and has taken inspiration from. Now, I like some of Taylor Swift's music, but I am not in any way a super fan. I just found out about this book, thought it sounded cool, and thought I'd give it a read. Now, before I read the book, this whole video concept was around reading a book that inspired a Taylor Swift song and going from that angle and being one of the books that Taylor Swift recommends. But, and no shade to Swiftie here, this book is way more than just one of Taylor Swift's favourite books, which is maybe a teeny tiny spoiler for my opinions on the book, but we're going to get into that properly later. First, what is Rebecca? I got this really stunning 80th anniversary edition, which I just think is beautiful. It doesn't even have the title of the book on the front cover. It's just got this like kind of slightly raised R, which looks embroidered, which is a kind of nod to something in the book itself, which is very cool. And then under the dust cover, just this beautiful red with this debossed R, which is very much a nod to the book. So Rebecca is a Gothic novel written by Daphne du Maurier and published in 1938. In the entire 88 years since it was published, it has never gone out of print. It's had 2 film adaptations, multiple TV, radio, stage adaptations, everything. It's permeated a lot of pop culture over the past 80 odd years. It's considered one of Daphne du Maurier's, if not her best, novel that she's written. And I will be vulnerable for a second and maybe sound a bit silly. I did actually have to Google specifically what a Gothic novel was. It's one of those terms I'd heard and kind of knew what it meant-ish, but total transparency, I was not entirely sure. And in case anybody else is in the same boat, no shame, okay? And from what I read, and it makes sense given Rebecca, a Gothic novel is a combination of horror and romance, often having a mysterious atmosphere with a sense of terror and sometimes a bit of supernatural. And this is honestly a genre I wish I'd known more about earlier, because how do you make romance more interesting? You put a bit of horror in it, right? Maybe some psychological terror, some supernatural ghosty elements. Perfect. Rebecca follows an unnamed protagonist, which I find very interesting. I've read a couple books that have unnamed protagonists and unnamed narrators now, and I find it a very kind of unnerving thing, but I really like it. So we first meet her in Monte Carlo, where she is working as a companion to an older, wealthier, kind of horrible sounding woman called Mrs. Van Hopper. Also FYI, this is going to be spoiler free to spoiler light. I will flag if I'm going to go more in depth into a spoiler. So our mildly irritating narrator is swept off her feet in Monte Carlo by a much older man, widower Maxim de Winter, who proposes very, very quickly after they first meet in what is probably the least romantic proposal I've ever read. And instead of continuing on as Mrs. Van Hopper's companion, our lovely narrator becomes the second Mrs. de Winter and follows her new, yet old, husband to his stately manor, Manderley, which is actually the centre of the iconic opening line of the book. Last night I dreamt I went to Manderley again. And maybe I'm not deep enough, or I just don't understand it. I mean, it's cute, it sets an atmosphere, but people rave about this opening line. Apparently it's incredibly famous, and I'm just like, if people hadn't told me it was a thing, I wouldn't have really thought anything of it when I read it. Anyway, Mrs. de Winter 2.0 and her new older husband arrive at Manderley, and it is positively cavernous in size. Like, nobody needs that much real estate, okay? And from then on, the book is focusing on how Mrs. de Winter 2.0 is in the shadow of the first Mrs. de Winter, Rebecca, who is dead. It's pretty damn intimidating. I mean, the entire book is named after a dead woman, Rebecca. We don't even learn the name of the narrator. This sums up the size of shadow that the second Mrs. de Winter is under from the first, or feels that she is under. Rebecca's shadow, as it were, creates this lingering sense of dread and suspense over the narrator, her new husband, and their relationship. Causes all kinds of problems. But why? What is really going on here? Is this in her head? Is something else the matter? And then we go to the problem with Maxim de Winter, the husband. He seems disinterested and cold, often referring to his new wife in a dismissing and or patronizing way. This is something Maxim is saying to his wife. Well then, a husband is not so very different from a father after all. There is a certain type of knowledge I prefer you not to have. It's better kept under lock and key. So that's that. And now eat up your peaches and don't ask me any more questions or I shall put you in the corner. I shall put you in the corner. And do not get me started on that god-awful proposal. I'm going to read the proposal, so if you don't want to know it, skip to this timestamp. Do you mean you want a secretary or something? No, I'm asking you to marry me, you little fool.
I'm asking you to marry me, you little fool.
That's it. That's the proposal. And she said yes. We'll come back to Maxim's inability to husband soon, because that's the focus of Taylor Swift's inspiration for her song from the book. I also quickly wanted to comment how really cool it is that Daphne du Maurier made a building, as in Manderley, feel like a character in the book. I've never seen that before, and I loved it. Like, it doesn't feel like it's just a house or a building or an estate. It feels like it's a character. Before we get into Taylor Swift's inspiration, I want to talk about the themes of Rebecca. So we've already covered it is a Gothic novel with major themes of identity, as in the narrator doesn't seem to have one, jealousy, of which the narrator seems to have too much of, love, and also the oppressive nature of gender roles and class divide. The narrator deals with all of these things and much more, and is truly a fish out of water in Maxim's world, and Rebecca's world for that matter. She truly is flopping around on the floor of the morning room in Manderley. Rebecca as a book has been very, very popular for a long time, and a lot of this is attributed to du Maurier's ability to create this gothic suspense and give this like psychological terror feel, and going into a lot of depth and having twists and turns that you wouldn't expect. As I mentioned earlier, it's also a book that's been referenced and adapted a lot in pop culture, from Alfred Hitchcock's 1940 film adaptation to the more recent 2020 film adaptation, which apparently is nowhere near as good. I've watched the 1941 and enjoyed it. I have not watched the 2021, but I will be. And there's been various other adaptations as well. It's also had big impacts on the literary world, with a specific character in particular, who I'm not going to name, I won't get into that kind of spoiler, whose archetype has been replicated time and time again ever since she were written by Daphne du Maurier. And Rebecca is considered a masterclass in Gothic atmospheric storytelling. And then something I really love about it is it has big grey areas when it comes to morality, and who the villain is, and how you're supposed to feel about characters. There's actually a fair bit of disagreement online over who the true antagonist of the book is and what the moral message is of it. This has led to a lot of debate and discussion of the book, which has obviously aided in keeping it current. I'm really holding back to not give too many spoilers or no heavy spoilers. I know it's an old book, and I know it's the kind of age where you're like, look, if you've not read it, if you don't know the storyline by now kind of vibe. However, when I shared that I was going to be reading it and it was on my TBR, I got a lot of comments like, oh my god, I'm so jealous. I love this book. I wish that I could have the experience of reading it for the first time again and not knowing what was happening. And I got to the end and I was like, I get it. I don't want to take that away. So if there's going to be a spoiler that would impact that kind of experience of reading the book, I will let you know. But I am holding my tongue to not say more. So kind of like mild spoiler coming up. So skip to this timestamp if you don't want it. There are two main interpretations of Rebecca that I've seen. And it's about the interpretation of the morality of the namesake of the book, Rebecca, versus Maxim, and which one of them is bad, or whether they both are, or whether neither of them are. And there's a lot of conversation around it, and I know where I sit, and I will be sharing my viewpoint at the end, but there is still so much debate over this. It's very interesting. Something that I did not know before reading this book, and was not going to be a part of this video whatsoever, but actually I find it fascinating and unsurprising now having read the book, is that modern interpretations of it and modern knowledge of Daphne du Maurier herself and her life have led to there being a lot of speculation that there are queer elements to Rebecca, as in the book, not necessarily the character. Just a little bit of rainbow popping in there, you know? This interpretation partially started coming about after du Maurier's death in 1989, where it was reportedly discovered that she was bisexual, and as a child had had an alter ego called Eric Avon. So the author herself seemed to not have adhered to the gender norms of a woman of her time. She was born in 1907, and some of these feelings that she's spoken about and that have come to light since her passing would not be expected. And these internal feelings that she had can be interpreted as having bled into the pages of Rebecca, with there being many suggestions of more than one of the women characters in the book not living up to the ideal standards and stereotypes of femininity of the time. I actually made so many notes whilst reading this book of like another case of a woman being described as being boy-like, or like a boy, or behaving like a boy, or should have been a boy, including Rebecca herself, who's simultaneously described as being beautiful and the perfect wife and the ideal standard of femininity, but also that she should have been a boy. This is about Rebecca. She had all the courage and spirit of a boy, had my Mrs. De Winter. She ought to have been a boy. I often told her that. I had the care of her as a child. You knew that, didn't you? I made notes whilst I was reading it. I was like, this seems like a really unusual way for women to be described at this time. I also legit thought that there was way more chemistry between the narrator and one of the other women characters than there ever was between the narrator and her husband. If you've read it, let me know if you think you know who I'm talking about. I would be really interested to see if you agree. Going back to the boy comments though, this seems to kind of mirror Daphne du Maurier's own description of herself as some kind of half-breed. Language was very different back in the 1930s compared to what it is now, so I'm not here to speculate over somebody's identity after their death. I'm just going to repeat the way she described her own feelings internally. So she said, as a half-breed and as someone internally male but externally female. And she also wrote to a woman that she was reportedly romantically involved / attracted to, that Eric, her boy alter ego from when she was younger, Eric realized he had to grow up and not be a boy any longer, so he turned into a girl, and not an attractive one at that. And the boy was locked in a box forever. Very fascinating. Also, kind of sad, because just the thought that somebody didn't feel like they could be themselves. This kind of language and the way Daphne du Maurier viewed herself has led to some loose interpretations that the narrator of Rebecca is kind of based off of her own feelings and herself. She is an unnamed woman who is shy, timid, feels like she's not living up to the expectations put on her by her status in life and as compared to other women. She literally feels like she is living in the shadow of another woman who is often described as the epitome of femininity, but also as someone who should have been a boy. There have been fan interpretations that a certain character was a closeted lesbian, not the one I would have guessed, and also not a personal interpretation I share. But all of this, among some other bits, have led to a lot of speculation that Daphne du Maurier's own internal feelings of identity, sexual orientation, gender, all of that kind of stuff, had an influence on the characters within Rebecca. And finding this out about Daphne du Maurier and how she felt about her gender and her sexual orientation wasn't a surprise after I'd read the book. The clues were cluing, the hints were hinting, the gay spidey senses were definitely tingling. But like I said, going into this video and reading the book and having this concept, talking about queer influences on this book was not at all on my horizon. This was supposed to be a pop culture reference for this book and the impact it's had on the literary world and movies, etc. But I couldn't not talk about the queer elements as well, right? But now that we've done that, we can pivot into Taylor Swift's inspiration and love for this book. The parallels are about to become ever more obvious. So Swift named Rebecca as the type of book she enjoys reading, including the setting of a British mansion, a mysterious relationship, and troubled romance. She said that she read the book during quarantine and was struck by the main character's emotions. When I was reading Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, I was thinking, wow, her husband just tolerates her. She's doing all these things and she's trying to impress him and he's just tolerating her the whole time. And so I ended up writing this song that's all about loving someone who is ambivalent. And Taylor Swift reading Rebecca ended up inspiring one of her most beloved songs from her Evermore album, Tolerate It. The song is supposedly written from the perspective of the narrator, about the experience of trying and failing to impress somebody who just doesn't see it. Having read the book, lyrics like, "You're so much older and wiser than I wait by the door like I'm just a kid, and I know my love should be celebrated but you tolerate it," are the ones that stand out as making the most sense to me in reference to the book. But the whole song is that kind of vibe, obviously. Personally, I get the whole angle of finding inspiration in the way Maxim de Winter treats Mrs. de Winter 2.0.
We're happy, aren't we? Terribly happy.
But, and another slight spoiler, I'm sorry, I just can't help myself. He's doing way worse than just tolerating his new wife. I do get that as an angle as well, but that kind of lets him off lightly in my opinion. But Tolerate It is often listed in top 10 or top 5 compilations of Taylor Swift's most devastating or sad songs, and many speculate that there's a personal connection felt from Taylor Swift towards those lyrics. And whilst the lyrics are pretty sad, Rebecca as a book feels like it's about way more, and this is not a dig at Taylor Swift. She picked a theme for the song that likely resonated with her the most personally, and it was the romantic ambivalence. But give me more of the horror side and the Gothic element of this novel. That's the bit I love. And then obviously people like Taylor Swift speaking out and writing a song literally inspired by this book boosts its appeal, brings it to a fresh audience. It was already doing very well for itself, again, hadn't gone out of print, but this would have breathed some new life into it to a completely new audience that may have never discovered it. And to be honest, it is technically through Taylor Swift writing Tolerate It that I came to find out about Rebecca and and is the reason I read it to begin with. When I started planning for this new channel many months ago now, I remember creating a list of books I wanted to read and coming up with a bunch of topics and then the books that I would want to read to discuss those topics. And my wife Shaba told me about the song and like, hey, did you know that there's a lot of literary inspiration in the songwriting world? And this is one that I know of amongst others. And then I read about the book and I was like, yeah, I want to talk about this book. I want to read it. Although saying that, the first note I made about Rebecca was about the blurb. And I was really confused about what to expect because I was like, the description sounds like it could be a romance or a horror or a mix of the two. I don't know. Which actually made me more keen to read it. And it turns out, yes, all of the above is correct. For reference, this is the description I based it on. While working as a paid companion to a domineering elderly lady, the timid heroine of Rebecca meets Maxim de Winter, a handsome widower. His proposal of marriage takes her by surprise and she is whisked off to Manderley, Maxim's Cornish estate. But the friendless young bride soon comes to realise that she barely knows her husband at all. And in every corner of every room she is haunted by the presence of his beautiful first wife, Rebecca. Now my favourite bit of any book video, my opinion. I personally love this book so much. It did take me a little bit of time to get fully into it. I'd say for the first 50 pages or so, I was kind of questioning the hype and I was like, am I bored? Which I now feel very guilty about. As I carried on reading, the storytelling was just so beautiful and I was entirely hooked. I love the way everything built up and then it unraveled and it was just, yes. I get the hype, I get the passion, I get wanting to be able to read it for the first time. Please let me erase that bit of my brain. All of it. I keep thinking about it, about the storyline, about the possible queer undertones of it as well. There was something about the atmosphere of the book and the constant questions over what was going on. Is this supernatural? Is it ghosty? Is there horror? Like, what's happening? Who is the villain? Who's done wrong, basically? It was all a bit of a headspin and very enthralling, yet frustrating, but not in a bad way. I also love a book where I can get angry at people. I love a character I can dislike or multiple characters I can dislike if you're supposed to, or if the idea is that some people will dislike this person and some people won't. If they're written to be likable and they're just irritating or horrible, that doesn't gel. But if they are written to be ambiguous and up for interpretation or deliberately written to be hateable or dislikable in some way, love it. And very early on, I wrote about Maxim. I'll smother this man in ketchup and stick him on a pole because he is a red flag. He's the reason that the version of this book has a red cover. But then I did write, sorry if I'm wrong, he just sounds icky so far. Let me know what you thought of Maxim de Winter if you've read the book. Spoiler, so skip to timestamp. I am no longer sorry if I'm wrong because I do not believe I am wrong. I do believe the man is a red flag. I also want to circle back to the decision to not name the narrator, which I think is genius. It also took me a while to realise that I hadn't just forgotten her name. I hadn't been told it. I remember getting to like page 100 or so and I flipped back to the beginning and I was like, oh shit, I forgot her name. This is really bad. I don't remember the narrator's name. And then I realised he's not been given a name except the second Mrs. de Winter. It leaves the literal narrator of the book second fiddle to the dead first wife. It leaves her completely lacking an identity. It also feels as if the author is diminishing the narrator just as the narrator diminishes herself. And other characters do this to her as well. My one criticism of the book, because no book is perfect. Well, I don't know. My one small criticism, but I wouldn't even call it a criticism, it's just a note that doesn't gel well with me personally, is the beginning of the book in particular had these nuggets that were really interesting and I was like hooked reading it, blah, 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 blah. And then it would be interrupted by quite long rambling descriptions of plants or food, which I guess built the atmosphere, but it just wasn't for me personally. It kind of broke the flow sometimes, but then other times it did work. They were more on the boring side for me. I still gave it a 5 out of 5 and I would love to read it again one day, and I want to have everybody I know read it so that I can talk to them about it, which is a great thing about this channel because I'm sure some of you will have read Rebecca and have opinions on it and I really want to hear them, so please leave your comments down below. It is now time for the spoiler of the video, so timestamp to skip to. I think Maxim is the villain. I don't think Rebecca is perfect. I think she had flaws, but I do not think she was the villain. I think she was misrepresented. I think she was ahead of her time. I do think she did some stuff wrong, but she did not deserve to die. I also feel like Maxim was portrayed kind of similar to Dexter in the TV show, where you're kind of manipulated. That feels like a mean word, but like you're kind of like manipulated by the author or, you know, the show creator to like this character and be rooting for this man who is actually a toxic piece of shit, a murderer. He is a bad bad, bad man. And I also think the narrator is simultaneously a victim of Maxim and an enabler, but she is likely confined by the societal expectations placed on her. And then finally, I do think Mrs. Danvers loved Rebecca. This is the kind of like lesbian love interpretation that I didn't agree with. I don't think she's in love with Rebecca. I think it's more of like a motherly figure. Personally, that's how I read it. And I do also think that she is the second villain of the book.
Well, that's a splendid idea, Mrs. Danvers. I'm very grateful.
But Maxim takes the villain crown. Spoiler done. Hello, welcome back. Let me know your thoughts down below. Let me know if you want to read it. Let me know if you have read it and what you think, and if you agree with some of my interpretations, or if you disagree. I would be really interested to hear. Let me also know some other books that you would like to hear me talk about, or other topics or things that you'd like me to explore. I'm having so much fun making these videos. I have so many ideas that I'm really excited to share with you. I have so many books to read. You can kind of see more of them with this lower down setup. I'm really grateful for all of you who are joining me on this journey. I really appreciate the support, and I will see you in the next chapter. Much love. Bye.